What is up, everybody? Josh Tapp here again, and welcome back to the Lucky Titan podcast. And today we're here with Rick Jordan, and I am so excited to have Rick here. And for a lot of you probably already know his name. This guy is pretty much what I would call internet famous. I mean, he's known all over the place. If you haven't heard him at this point, I'd be very surprised because he is the host of the All In podcast. And this guy, honestly, I could praise him for days, right? I've been listening to his stuff, seeing his content all over. It's just an honor to talk with him, but he's really here. We were talking about this in our pre-interview. He's really here to be a real human and share some real experience with you. And that's why we're excited to have him here. So Rick, say what's up to everybody and we'll hop in.
What's shaking, Josh? Good to be here, my man.
Yes, I am excited to have you here, Rick. So Rick, first off, give us a little bit of background about what got you into podcasting in the first place, because all of us have kind of a funny story with that, I feel like.
Dude, it's a hilarious story for me. I hired a branding agency almost 3 years ago now. And when I told them what I'm doing, what I'm going after, they're like, oh, you need a podcast. And I was like, all right, then that's literally the end of the story on how it started. I'm like, okay, then I guess that's what I got to do. You know, like we're going to do all this video and create this sizzle reel for you and all this amazing stuff, but you need a podcast because you have to get your voice out there. I was like, all right, if you say so. And here I am, almost 150 episodes later, two years later. But and that branding agency is gone too at this point, and that's actually that's a good point, because this just happened maybe even just 4 months ago now, is that I switched from a branding agency to a full PR firm. I leveled up, so it's something that I constantly do, always asking why we're doing the things that we're doing with my team. And that's something that I think people could even start to do tomorrow, is just analyze where they're at so they know where they're going.
See, and I absolutely love that. We were talking about this in the pre-interview, and I want to let everybody know there's two big areas we want to cover today. We're going to be talking about Rick's methodology behind monetizing his show, but really he's been taking, they're about, I don't know if I can even say this. They have a really successful launch. Can I say that you're an IPO? I'll edit it out.
Yeah, go for it. It is. Yeah.
They're going to IPO in 60 days. And so, I mean, they're about to take their company to a whole other level, but he's done this by really just focusing on his niche. And like he said, scaling up, leveling up from a branding agency to a full-on PR agency. And so for a lot of you, that's probably your next step, right? Are these bolt-on acquisitions, IPO, whatever you've got to do to scale to that next level. So we're going to cover those two big topics. So let's come back to podcasting first, Rick.
Yeah, brother.
I loved your take on it. First off, because it just kind of validates what I say, but
there's always a funny story, right?
There's always a funny story. So I want to talk to you about how you monetize your podcast, because as we talked about, 99% of the people who I talk to, they're like, okay, I have a podcast. Now what? How do I make money? When do I get a sponsor? And I usually just tell them, don't worry about it. So
yeah, right on. And yeah, for sure, dude. And we talked about this a little in the pre-interview too. Yeah, and I likened it to the musician that thinks they're just going to make it into the music industry, without years or a decade worth of grit and sweat. They're in Nashville. You feel like you want to make money off the podcast and directly monetize it. It's like that street musician that's getting, quarters and sometimes, maybe if you're lucky, a full dollar bill thrown in that guitar case. Yeah, because it's very difficult to monetize directly. So if that's your goal, being like, I'm going to be like the Joe Rogan of the world, here's the point though, is that Joe doesn't really even focus on that as a monetization method. Almost nobody does, because there's always other things that we're doing. Like I have a cybersecurity company. Joe is involved in so many different areas too, or Dave Asprey, he has Bulletproof. There's always some other thing that's really the main focus. And the podcast has to be one of those threads that ties in and is almost like the water of the rising tide that lifts everything else up. So you're closing deals like I do, or finding targets for acquisition with our IPO coming up from the podcast. I'm having people on from the industry or around the industry that can create this status level for me. And then that creates trust recognition within the industry so I can acquire.
Yeah, and I love that, because really what it comes down to, what people don't realize, and I just want to highlight this point, because what you're saying is it's not about directly monetizing it, right? We have a couple strategies that I would say almost mildly directly connect.
Oh yeah, you can put affiliate links in the show notes, right, and that kind of stuff. But I mean, if you want to have like some Starbucks money, that's the way to go.
Yeah. But you mentioned something that I don't think a lot of people realize. And I think so many podcasters are just throwing this opportunity away, right?
Yeah.
The value of the network, and it's not even just the network, but the relationship you build on a podcast is completely different, because you're giving the speaker an opportunity, a chance to brag about themselves, basically, right? Share their
Yeah.
wisdom and feel good about themselves. And it kind of starts the relationship off in the right way. Instead of saying, hey, can we meet up and have coffee? Can I pick your brain? Right? Like all these dumb things that people don't want to do. The podcast just circumvents all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
You've been using it too, like you said, and I want to hit on this point because I think it dovetails directly into the next point, but you're talking about bringing on potential acquisitions, right? Bringing in companies that you would like to buy or bolt on or maybe JV with onto your show. So let's talk a little bit about that and how you've been leveraging that.
Yeah, man. The guest, because I'm in the cybersecurity space, or it's called the IT managed service provider space, or MSP. That's like the real thing that I do, right? And I take that a little bit from Andy Frisella, who also has an amazing show too. Was MF CEO and now it's Real AF, and he has First Form. It's a freaking 9-digit company, and that's the real thing. But people that listen to the show end up buying the supplements from First Form. So he's not directly monetizing it, but he's there. This really is kind of like secondarily a philanthropic effort for me because, dude, I was broke 13 years ago, in a condo with 2 newborn twins, and I was running an extension cord out into the hall to leach power because I couldn't pay my power bill just to keep the formula and the breast milk cold in the refrigerator so my kids could eat. That's where I was. So now it's like I've got it. That's the form of, if you want to call it giving back, but it's the impact side of what I need to do. Even on the real business side, it's impact related because acquiring businesses will allow me to take some of those struggling owners that have the pressures that are really just sort of like owner operators and not necessarily CEOs or entrepreneurs and give them a freaking steady paycheck, dude. So when I have those out of my industry, if I'm not going to directly acquire them, what you were talking about the network, because everybody knows everybody, and now my name is out there more, so now it builds that trust factor so that they can actually allow me to have that conversation about buying their baby, acquiring their business.
And people, I recently been working with Carl Allen, if you're familiar with his methodology
Yeah.
of buying and selling businesses. I'm working with him recently, and I loved, he said something that just kind of solidifies your point here too, is that when you're when people sell their business, it's like 94% of them, it has nothing to do with the money and everything to do with they're handing it to somebody who will take care of it.
Yeah,
They
it's that blood, sweat, and tears, man. Yeah.
right. And
Because
it
it's not
seems,
just their business, it's the people in their business that they feel they've been caring for all those years too.
well, and imagine, I mean, if you were to sell your company right now and your employees all got fired, I mean,
Yeah,
those relationships are gone in a
you
lot
got
of
it.
cases, right? Because
You
you've
got it.
burned the bridge just so you can make some money. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't look at it that way. They look at the numbers
Yeah.
side and say, oh, how do we just, make the most amount of money? So
Yeah.
I want to ask you this in particular, just because of, as we've been going through this conversation, it seems like this seems to be your real area of expertise. And how have you been building trust with your team, with the people you're interviewing, as well as leveraging them to make money?
Yeah, man, that's a fantastic question. I do have a team that books guests for me now, and I've always had an internal team, I should say. Before, that branding agency I told you about that said, hey, you should have a podcast, you need a podcast, they were booking originally. But this is one thing I've noticed is that having people do it in-house is the best way to establish those connections you're talking about because they know your core. Your own people know your core. They know your voice the best because you're always around them and they're helping advance the mission. Even better, they actually believe in the mission. They're not a vendor, and vendors are great. Outsourcing is fantastic, man. And I'm trying to stick to the mode of I'm going to insource everything that generates revenue and outsource everything that's just an expense. That's sort of the dividing line going into the IPO now. But inside, people that know your voice are so important, man, that will fully believe in your mission because then they can help establish those initial connections and form the network. Because if you're as busy as I am or as busy as you are or as your listeners are, there's so much going on that you need other people to be able to lift you up, to be able to take over those parts where you can so that you can just focus on your core. If you're a visionary, awesome, like I am, just go out there and do your creative stuff. Be in your genius. And then you can grow podcasts. You can develop those networks. And another big spot too, dude, is speaking on stages or now virtual events. That's it. You talk about promoting a show too, or promoting a podcast. It's really tough from an AdWords perspective or social media ads the real way to build audience is doing just what you and I are doing right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know what's really interesting, just to touch on that point for you. I mean, you said going on to these virtual stages. I honestly didn't hugely believe in the virtual stages until this last year.
Yeah.
Just going
Dude,
on,
you can reach so many people.
yeah,
Holy hell. You know?
they're sitting there on the computer already. So you send
Yeah.
a link and they'll just look it up while they're sitting there. And so, oh man, yeah, absolutely. I love it. And so, I want to touch on a few points there because like I said, I feel like that's your superpower, right? Is you really have a great heart for caring about people, but you also are that visionary creative. So for you, when you're growing your business and you're working heavily on, you're about to IPO, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a very difficult thing. You're probably working heavy hours right now, I would assume, in
Dude, it
preparation.
sucks. Everyone says congratulations, and it's there
Right.
was
Tell me
one.
congratulations when it's over.
Exactly. There was one dude that was like, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because being the CEO of a public company sucks ass." Like, yeah, it's the next best way to do something. I need to raise capital, and this is the giving back part because it's like a public way to involve the entire country, the entire world in this effort.
Right.
So that's why I feel like it's bigger than me, and why I love that.
Yeah. Well, and I like the way you're giving back because I think, and this has been really heavily on my mind the past couple of weeks. I've been talking to a lot of people who are in your position, right? You're a step further than we are. You're selling companies, you're scaling, you're growing way well past the seven figures mark, which is kind of our next step is to start acquiring multiple companies as well. And so as I'm watching people like you, it's really interesting to watch that your main focus really is the people. It's like, how do I focus on the people? How do I live a great life while still making money? And
Yeah.
and I mean, one of the big questions that I've had recently with that is like, how do you balance the just giving away money and also like actually profiting? Because it's really, I love the way that you said you do it. It's giving back, but your company's still making money from it, but you're presenting opportunities for people.
Yeah, I have good people to keep me in line with that. I have a board of directors now because we're going public. I have a CFO who really is pro Rick 100%. So he understands my heart. And at the same time, he also keeps me in line with that because while it's a great superpower, like you said, is my compassion and empathy, it also can become a weakness because I tend to just dive into things and just give lots of stuff away. So right now, going into this year, he's like, Rick, ReachOut needs you. They need you to do all this stuff. You are running an incredibly profitable enterprise, and all of your spending is on all the compassionary and just like passion project stuff. He goes, it's not the time for that. Go through this now. He goes, that was a great season last year and the year before, but go through the IPO now, and then you're going to have 500 times the money to dump into all those passion projects. So it's cool because he's not squashing my heart in that, but he's saying, let's build it the right way because even though you thought you were spending a lot over here and doing these amazing things, you could do so much more, but you have to hit this middle ground first. You can't skip this step.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think it kind of goes clear back to how you act in the home, right? I mean, people don't realize that a lot of times is like
Yeah,
they're trying to separate themselves from their home life and put themselves into the business world and be a different person, but it
yeah.
translates over. So I want to ask you this too, and I don't actually usually talk about this kind of stuff, but I feel like this is the direction we ought to go with this. So for you, how has your home life been affected, especially by the IPO and everything, where you're having to work ridiculous hours? How have you been managing that?
Yeah, it can be tough, man. And there's times to where it really, really sucks. I'm just being straight up. And I do work a lot of hours. There are ways to where I integrate my kids into what I'm doing. For example, my twins that I was telling you about a little bit ago, they're 13 years old. One, Richard, he's starting to edit some of my show now too. He's getting into video editing. He wants to be a filmmaker, which is awesome. He even traveled with me last year when I filmed my documentary, Liberty Lockdown, and was doing some BTS and behind the scenes footage. He's really starting to get into it. So whenever I'm batching, dude, he's here. And then he's coming in the studio, and then he's coming a couple more times a month to set up the shows for the actual editor. So he's learning Adobe Premiere. So there's always that thing. There's a principle that I've lived by, man, which is proximity. And even if you can't necessarily be there for those hours, dude, why can't you just involve your kids in what you're doing already? And then my daughter writes copy for some of the stuff now. We probably use about 20% of what she writes because that's her passion. I saw some of the stuff she was writing when she was 9 and 10 years old. I'm like, this is a real gift that you have. So now you see, 20% of our copy is actually coming from my daughter, who's only 13 years old, because she's writing and reading at the level of a 28-year-old. It's amazing when you see these things, and you can just foster those talents because there's no limit to what your kids can do. And I think kids are extremely underrated.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love that you do that. So I'm actually like a fifth generation entrepreneur. I know I'm four generations. I believe I'm fifth generation back entrepreneur. And my dad did the same thing with me. He owned a construction company.
Yeah.
Can't tell you how much I hate construction, but I grew up out there working with these people. But it actually inspired in me to figure out what my gifts were. And like you said, really understand company businesses. And
Yeah.
it's like your two kids are going to be so far and above everybody else by the time they graduate high school.
Yeah, man.
I mean, they're going to be 18 and millionaires at this point, right?
No doubt. There's a book I've been reading over the past couple of weeks too called The Way of the Superior Man. It was recommended to me by my coach, and just being straight up, a lot of entrepreneurs it's male dominated, right? There's a female book that's a woman book that's by the same author too. So I would encourage women to read that. But The Way of the Superior Man, when I was going through this, I was like, man, this is describing exactly me. Because this comes back to what you're talking about, how to work well or integrate well with your home life. And if you're trying to disseminate or like split hours and say, I'm going to be home here during this time, or I'm going to be at work during this time, you're going to fail, dude. And you're going to fail hard. I tried that. When you start to integrate everything around and understand that as a man, because of the masculine energy that we have, it needs to be purpose first. Because if you're saying, oh, if I can't be a dad first, or I can't be a husband first, then how am I going to succeed in business? That's actually flip-flopping it, dude. Because there's no way that you can bring all of yourself into your family, into your wife, your kids as a man, if you're not fulfilling your purpose in life. You're always going to have this empty hole, because as men, going back to the days of the cavemen, we were always the ones going out and providing, right? That's always been it. It's like built into us, dude. So if we're not fulfilling our purpose, whatever it is, there's no way we're going to be the best husband, the best dad, the best partner, anything. It has to be purpose first. And when you do that, your family will respect you more, because they will see you fulfilled, and therefore they can understand that they can also have a fulfilling life.
Yeah. And wow, what an awesome point. I hope people are internalizing that. I know for me, so I don't even have kids yet, just me and my wife.
Yeah.
This recording, right? Who knows when you're listening to this, right? But me and my wife, and we're, I've even found just in our marriage, if I'm stressed out and everything from work, it kills the relationship, right? I come home disconnected. I don't want to do anything, or I just want to keep working, which is half the problem, right? But I love what you're talking about there, because when you're fulfilled and when you're actually living your purpose and also fulfilling the needs of your families, right? Your family with financially and everything else, you can then be there for them in a loving way. And I love that you're being able to do that. And you're kind of, I wouldn't even say blurring the line, but kind of bringing those two worlds together by bringing your kids into your world, bringing your world to your kids. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, dude. Otherwise you're like split personality, like schizophrenia
right.
or something like that. It just doesn't work, and you're going to fail miserably. I've done that. I've fallen hard in that. Yeah. And this is the best way that I could figure it out. It's like, oh, if I'm not fulfilling my purpose over here, then I'll never be respected by my family. Yeah. If I'm actually not doing what I'm called to be doing on this planet. And I know this is mindset stuff, man, but tomorrow what people can do is they can reevaluate their priorities in life. If they're like, oh, I got to drive my kids around here and there, why can't you have like somebody else? Maybe you need to hire an EA or something that could drive your kids to soccer or whatever else, because even though that's great, to be there for them in that moment, but if that takes you away from your purpose to begin with, there's no way that you can even come back for dinner the next day and actually have a fulfilling conversation with your family. It has to be purpose first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the mindset on it, because I think that more recently for us, even in our own company, I have to do that almost weekly. Sit down and say, okay, where was my time spent? Did I actually put it into what I care about? It's moving my mission forward, but I'm also still being a good husband, or am I spending too much time trying to figure out this email issue or something, right?
Yeah. There's
And
a rule of if I can bring this, there's a rule of
yes,
ones and threes. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I've noticed it over the past decade as I've built businesses here. Ones and threes mean that you hit plateaus, you hit walls, or really growth points at ones and threes. So 100,000, 300,000, 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, 30 million, 100 million, so on. And right now I'm at the 3 million mark. And I remember breaking that $1 million mark and going through some of the same struggles that I am right now. And that's when I had to shift things up, because you're not going to get past, you might hit it, that 1 million mark, but you're not going to get past that 1 million mark until you start to decide to do purpose first. You have to do that. So that's why I'm saying tomorrow, anyone who's listening needs to evaluate where their priorities are and what they're spending their time on. Because if it's not about your purpose, then you're just never going to get past that 7-figure mark. And you're never, especially, going to get to 3 million. So right now with the IPO, that's the way I'm breaking through this plateau, is the 3 million mark. Is now I'm going to acquire companies, and I'll almost immediately be at a $100 million valuation within 6 months with the plan that's on board. But then it's going to be a different struggle, dude, at that point to get to 300 million. I know it is, because I've lived this now. Before, I used to be like, oh, that's just some stupid numbers and mindset stuff that people make up. But I've seen it at 100,000, 300,000, 1 million, and now 3 million. Those walls that you can hit, and you have to understand them. That $1 million one, though, when you get to that 7-figure mark, if you want to go past that, you have to start moving into purpose first.
I love that. And what's so fun for me is I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs about this. That's kind of our whole goal here, is to help people break that plateau, because like you said, I've never heard that rule, but I'm totally going to quote you twice and use that. So
good. But I've seen it in action now, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You think people throw this out. I don't know why that is, but it just is.
And honestly, I've tried to understand the science behind it and the mentality behind it. I really genuinely think it's just because most of us can't even fathom $1 million when we're born.
Yeah.
And then when you make it to that point, it's like, wow, that really isn't as much money as you think it is.
No, it's not at all. I mean, I know that if everything crashed and burned tomorrow, I could go back out and hit $1 million in a matter of like 6 weeks,
Right.
build the business back up, because I've done it already.
Yeah.
But getting past that 3 million mark, that's why I now have other people to help me too. People that have been to the 300 million mark and the $8 billion mark with IPOs. They're on my team now because I've never been there. And that's another thing too. When you're choosing leaders, take a look at our team members, the people that are around you, mentors, coaches, and this is evaluation. Maybe that's the theme of this show. I don't know, dude. Tomorrow, evaluate who you have around you, because someone can only lead you to a place that they've been themselves. If they haven't been there, they can fight and claw with you and try to learn with you. But dude, that's going to be such a long time, a really long time. You can only lead somebody as far as you've been.
Yeah. And I love that, because really what we've been seeing, we've interviewed 170 or 180 entrepreneurs at this point now, asking them that question, like, what would you do if you were stuck, and how would you break that barrier? And so I do want to ask you that same thing, is for you, would that be hiring a coach, or where would you start if you were like, I hit $1 million, I'm stuck, now what?
Yeah, I would really start evaluating everybody around me. And this isn't just coach. I've had coaches now for the 13 years, even when I couldn't afford it and was stealing electricity from the condo association, I was still paying a coach. That's when I couldn't even afford to pay the coach. It was like $800 a month, man, like 10 grand a year, which is insane, because now it's like 150K a year I spend on my mentors, but at 10 grand a year, I couldn't even afford it. But yet this is another thing that I've done, is commit first, because you'll figure out the way to do it when you tell somebody, yeah, I'm going to do it, and it just is a new fire that's under your ass to move forward when you don't know the how, but you say yes and commit first. You'll figure out the how along the way, because then you'll start to do that backwards math. If you commit to something 30 days, I don't know how I'm going to get there. Well, now I know I have 30 days. What am I going to do? Yeah. So I would look at people around you, and dude, this is a lot having to do with friends too, and even some family members sometimes, is that they don't understand when you get to that $1 million mark. Because just like you said, not a lot of people can imagine that, and when you're making $1 million in revenue, you're really only taking home like 100K. Yes. But you have more cash flow, which gives you more options. Everyone says cash is king. I think cash is more like queen, and cash flow is king. That's it. When you have more cash flow, you have more options. But those people around you, friends especially, friends are good for a season, dude. You can't really make new old friends, but you can always make new friends. Those old friends might have been just around for a season in your life because those are the ones that are going to get jealous of you, dude. Some of them might come along, which is great. And I've had family that used to just trash me, and be like, why can't you be content? I mean, I'm talking like siblings, dude. Why can't you just be content? Why are you doing all this? Why do you spend this much money? Why aren't you with your family that much? Yeah, and it's like, well, I've got purpose, and my family respects me for what I do too. But now, after a few years, I had this example one time. It's like when you have the plane on the tarmac and it looks kind of raggedy with maybe some holes in it, like a brand new model prototype. They're like, you know what? I'm not so sure that thing's going to fly. You're kind of crazy. But dude, when you're at 30,000 feet, you can't deny that you're up in the air sustaining flight. Nobody can. So it might be tough for a time period with family, but friends, dude, there's certain friends that are there for seasons, and that's okay because they can still live a happy, fulfilled life, and you can still live a happy, fulfilled life, just not together.
See it, and I absolutely love that because I mean, I even know with me, I've had to cut friends out of my life, and it's not because they're bad people or anything, but it's because our trajectories are going differently, right?
Yeah, yeah,
They might be going off like on a medical route, right? Not that I disagree with that or anything. I think that's great. They're going that direction. I wanted to grow a business, but our mindsets are just aren't in the same. They're not
yeah,
aligned, right?
yeah.
We're thinking in two different ways, and so I love that because it's about surrounding yourself with those people. And I want to bring this full loop because with a podcast,
Yep.
that's the best way to surround yourself with people, man. I mean,
Dude,
getting
it
around
is. Yep.
I mean, how would I get done to be able to sit down with Rick Jordan, right? How else would I be able to sit down and talk to this guy? I mean, think about it that way, right? This is the way to get in the door with other people. So Rick, and I want
Yeah.
to kind of tie this up into one beautiful bow, right? So
Let's
walk me,
make it pretty.
let's make it beautiful, right? Walk me through how you broke the $1 million plateau, and then we'll kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, that was one of those plateaus for sure. And I was stuck around maybe 700K for a bit. It was just busting past that. I ended up looking around for new revenue streams, and it was within. This is the crazy thing because it was within my existing client base is where I found these. So I went back and I added new services. But then, dude, I remember making this spreadsheet right across all the clients and making this is something people can do tomorrow, listing all of my clients and listing all the services and products that I offered, and like little check marks and finding who didn't have what. Because you just don't understand when you're at that point to go back into existing because you're always thinking, hey, new clients are the lifeblood of the business, which they are. Whether you grow organically or acquire, those are still new clients within your business. But in order to break through some of these plateaus, dude, all you got to do is just go back to your existing client base and analyze what you've sold so far to each one and what they're missing out on. Because I've said this a million times, what is sales if it's just not a conversation? If you sit down and just say, hey, you know what? This is something that we do. I don't know if I've ever told you about it, but I think it can help you. And I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't at least tell you about it. How do you feel about this? Now, if they have questions, awesome. But you just hit every single client with these things. Make that matrix, that spreadsheet or whatever, and figure out who doesn't have what. And then you can almost, dude, I swear, it was like 30% was the increase just by going back to in recurring revenue and going to existing clients. Like, I didn't even know you did that. I'm like, I know, because I never told you. My fault. Now you know, and now you're going to pay me, and now you're going to be happy.
Yeah, and I love that because that is a practice you can do today. And I've seen this happen when even our own company. When we do that, I've never thought about just like list your people and say, put check marks. What products do they have? What do they not have? I
Yeah.
mean, that is a very, very simple way for you to take 20 minutes out of your day, do that practice, and you'll probably find an additional 10 to 20 grand in your business overnight. Right.
Yep. It's also a good way to shed the clients that you really don't want, the ones that don't really gel well with your company. But when you start, let's just be real. You take on any money you possibly can.
Right.
You have
That's how you
bills.
break 300,000. That really
Yes, it is right on. You just oh sure, whatever. I'll go to the bathroom, and even though I'm a server guy, I'll just scrub your toilet, no problem. Give me $150 an hour, sure. I'll do whatever you want me to do. But yes, but during that spreadsheet and figure out what they don't have, that's a good way to kind of chop off the bottom of that list too, because you can easily lose 10% of your client base if you go through the spreadsheet route and figure out what they're not there. And you can lose a lot of stress when you do that too, because they're ones that are taking up a lot of your time that you could be working on the business rather than working in the business. They're just sucking up your time, man. So
Yeah.
there's a way to do that and lose those clients. The other way to really do this too is to raise your prices. You need to raise your prices every single year, if not a little more. And you're like, well, my clients won't pay it. We've done this a couple times now over the past decade. I haven't done it every single year, even though we are going forward now after the IPO with that. But when I do that, there's never been a single customer, a single client that has squawked at it whatsoever, because they understand the value that they're receiving. But I'm the unicorn that way. I was fully expecting to lose 10% of my client base every single time. But you can raise your prices, by about 15%. The math is kind of crazy. You can raise your prices by about 15% across the board and drop the bottom 30 of your clients and still make the same money. So it's amazing. And then now you can put that energy into better clients that pay more, new clients that are just top notch, top tier.
See, and I hope people will take that as honestly one of the best pieces of guidance from this entire. We've covered so many really awesome points, but when it comes down to business, it's all about the not to do list, right? It's about kicking out the people that are you don't want in the party, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not because they're bad people, but we've had clients like that where I just loved them to death. They gave me a percentage of their company, but just so everybody knows, if somebody gives you a percentage, it means they can't afford your service.
Yeah, right on. Yep.
That's what it comes down to. And unfortunately, those are the clients that we had to get rid of. Even though I loved them, loved working with them, they were the life sucks. They're the energy suck. And all of your time goes into that bottom 10 to 30%. But if you had that open up, how much bigger could your 70% be?
You got it. You got it.
It's beautiful. I didn't know the math about the 15%, 30. Anyways, 30%, you can get rid of 30% of your customers. So really intriguing. I'm going to look at that.
Yeah, man, it's fun.
Well, Rick, to finish this off, first off, where can people get access to your podcast?
Dude, it's everywhere, but I still say iTunes because it switched to Apple Podcasts after a little while. But Apple Podcasts is the best platform. I have a larger following on Spotify too. Those are really the two major ones. But either one, if you prefer Castbox or Stitcher or whatever else is out there, some of the other 40 of them, it's everywhere. But really, Spotify or Apple Podcasts would be the place I would send you just for the best listening experience.
I love that. And everybody, just so you know, his podcast really is heavily, it's similar to ours, but he's interviewing very, very successful people as well. And if you've listened to this interview, he brings fire to the mic, but he's also the guy that's going to help extract fire from other people. So go check out his podcast. It's All In, right?
All In with Rick Jordan.
All In with Rick Jordan. Yep. I looked it up and there were a couple other podcasts and I'm like, shoot, which one is it?
Yeah, I was the older one, except for Chris Hayes, a couple years ago, because we were like, well, that's okay because we're totally different. There's only two of us, that's fine. But now there's like 87 different All In. So it's All In with Rick Jordan. Yes.
Awesome. Go check it out. So it's the OG. Make sure you go check that out. And then finally, Rick, just to finish this off, what is your final parting piece of guidance for our audience?
Dude, whatever we talked about today, make sure that you start it tomorrow. Don't sit on this. You can do that forever. And one of the things that really bugs me is like the forever students, right? You're never going to get anywhere when you just sit and listen and do whatever all day long. I would rather people not listen to my show and actually go and put forth and apply what we talked about today, because that means that I had impact in their lives. Still go listen to the show. Still subscribe to the show, of course. But whatever we talk about today or later on another episode on your show or my show, whatever, make sure that what you learned today you put into action tomorrow.